Yes, hello. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy to be here. Thank you, James and the team and Petra's team for inviting us to this great event so far that I have seen. I'm thrilled to be here with two spectacular women from the venture capital, private and private sector, and they will be able to walk us through a relevant issue that is how we bring the talent that is in the hands of half of the society and make it work for entrepreneurship, for investment, and for impact. So if you allow me, I'll give the floor to Shiva Dustar and Lara Kool so they can introduce themselves. Shiva, are you there? Or Lara, you can start yourself.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Lara Kool of Philips Ventures. So quick introduction. I'm a partner at Philips Ventures, which is the corporate venture capital arm of Philips Healthcare. I lead the European investment activities for our venture capital group and focused on digital health and medtech investments in the European ecosystem. Happy to be part of this discussion and looking forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Shiva. We'll also share with us. Sorry.
Thank you, Amparo. My name is Shiva Dustar, and I'm the head of division of Innovation Finance Advisory at the European Investment Bank. And I'm really excited to be part of this exciting discussion. In my role, we advise innovative companies in Europe to have better access to finance, and we also do thematic studies that then lead us to become better equipped with the financial tools to support big innovative sectors. And one big mega trend is, of course, for us also financing women entrepreneurs. I'm really excited to be here today.
Thank you, Shiva. And Shiva, maybe she can walk us through one of the pioneers studies in Europe in this field on why women are missing the financing issue in Europe, entrepreneurs. So Shiva, maybe you can walk us through the main findings. Please go ahead.
Indeed. So it's quite exciting to be here today. I mean, you see actually, and I have also a copy, a nice hard copy in front of me. This is a study which we just sort of launched a few months ago. It is available on our eib.org website, so you can certainly download the version. Now, what this study, I mean, we did this for the European Commission and generally also to raise awareness within the EIB and wider EIB group, EIB, EIF, to better understand what is going on. It was clear when we did our EIB gender strategy, lending strategy, that our portfolio did not seem we had not yet tracked, so to speak, our own portfolio. And we're trying to understand what is it right now that may hold back the financing of women founded companies in Europe. So it was really together with the European Commission to try to understand the state of play and look at it from, of course, the role of public finance in this, and then have recommendations really also in preparation of the next large MFF, the large multi-annual financial frameworks, and so the budget of the next 7 years. What can be improved in terms of ensuring that there is more financing available and that there's also more demand for such financing, because clearly it seems to be, we hope that more and more women-owned companies are looking for this type of patient capital that the EIB group offers. So when we looked at, and you see on this slide, sort of some summary points, there are indeed, the glass it's one of those classic situations. Depending on how you look at the data, you can see the glass as being either half empty or half full. And this goes actually, if you look at it, even Europe versus the rest of the world, US versus the US, where again, depending on what data you focus on, it could be either half empty or half full. The main, what we, however, got a lot of comfort from is that the percentage of women-owned companies is growing all over the world, and certainly also in Europe, we see actually a positive a trend. We also, the data suggests that indeed the performance of women-owned companies also shows some very promising results. However, if you look at the supply side, only 2% of the actual VC investments go towards women-owned companies. I mean, again, you may see different numbers between 2 and 4%, and it's maybe sometimes a matter of how you sort of define the pool of financing, whether you may bring some of the impact into it as well. But the point is that it's a very low percentage, especially if you compare that against 38% of startups actually having women founders. So clearly, there is a disconnect here. Now, when we looked at it, the study did not mean to be very comprehensive in terms of its kind of going in depth into what are the biases or what are the key, it looked more at the sort of trend lines and also at the key sort of issues that may persist. But ultimately, there was one of the big themes is that there is a knowledge gap. There is, unfortunately, on both sides. So on the one hand, you have women-owned companies that are really not even aware of all the various financing tools, especially on the public side, that may actually be quite useful for them to tap into. And then we have, of course, also on the supply side, unfortunately, a rather disproportionate or a very imbalanced setup. And I think this is where Lara and I will actually focus our discussion. So when we looked at the recommendations, really it was important to tackle these issues, both supply and demand side, across both policy, and the wider policy orientation of the European Union. I mean, we're looking at it from a European Union perspective, but I think this goes for obviously for many other parts of the world. What are the sort of framework conditions that can be put in place? But then really also in terms of advisory support, in terms of making sure that there is, that there are adequate financing mechanisms, and really awareness raising. And I think this is precisely why we are grateful to the global corporate venture community and global corporate venturing as an organization, that they give us these platforms, because ultimately a lot of it is about the awareness. So maybe quickly moving to the next slide. Roberta, if you could perhaps move one slide over. Yeah. I did cover some of these, but I mean, some of these points in my early introduction, but, there is clearly on the investor side, as I mentioned, the ratio of women to men is rather, so there are basically, the research shows that the investment firms with women partners are twice as likely. I mean, those that have women partners are twice as likely to invest in companies founded by women. I think this is very often called the homophily, or that you may be conditioned to invest in things that look like you or have the profiles similar to you. I think a lot of these data would suggest that it just makes a lot of sense. And I know there's a lot going on right now in the research community, but also just to suggest that diverse investment teams just will make better decisions. And we hope that by bringing this into really implementing this and seeing a big shift in more diverse key decision makers being also women, but of course it goes across the diversity spectrum, that this in itself will actually bring about changes. So we do hope that the conversations like today will really encourage all the investment teams that are out there looking to hire new talent, that they bear that in mind, and actually also have it at the top level, at the partner level, so that the decision making is also benefiting from it. Maybe then the last, the next slide, please. Yeah, I mean, I think here we will have the discussion, but it's about the role of the public sector in crowding in the private capital. I think this is ultimately, what we hope that at the level of the European Investment Bank Group, so that's the EIB as a bank, and also the European Investment Fund, that our role is going to be catalytic as the anchor investor. Now, this can be catalytic at the company level when we become maybe an anchor lender, or being the first sort of provider of patient capital, quasi-equity, venture debt type financing, helping companies to move from equity into the debt space, or at the intermediate level via being a limited partner in VC funds. And I think here what we hope to see more and more is just certainly an awareness, but more also taking the similar approach that we see on a thematic basis. So we see right now, across the, as you know, basically across the whole investor community, a thematic focus, whether it's AI, blockchain space, agri-food. I think to the extent that one can bring a cross-cutting, also gender-smart investing lens to the various LP investments, and then as a public sector institution to bring that in as an anchor, we hope that this in itself will also crowd in other LPs. But this is, of course, a discussion that we will have with Lara. So maybe just as a summary page, the last slide, I put it out there. I mentioned that, we would hope to tackle things at the 4 different level of policy, financing, advisory, and awareness. And this is where, I think the conversation needs to happen today. How can we bring in the private capital? And I give the floor back to Lara.
What I really liked, Shiva, also when we were brought together by James on this topic, that I think also as a corporate we could have a very complementary role, similar to what your role is as a public financer. And it was interesting that about over the course of this year, we actually started to become more conscious on the CVC level of our role as an LP in venture capital funds. Because we did kind of just an overview on, we haven't never really looked at these type of gender diversity criteria in our funds. So let's just have a look at the composition of the teams in our funds. So we are an LP in 9 venture capital funds, institutional venture capital funds all across the globe. We have 1 female partner. There's only 1 across all those teams in 9 different funds. So clearly we did not have this criteria. Even within healthcare, which is a sector where you actually see a larger prevalence of female-led companies or mixed team founders. We even see that in our direct portfolio. So we actually do have quite a few mixed teams and actually a few female CEOs in our portfolio. But across the VC landscape, there's really a lack of diversity. And what I found an interesting concept, as you were referring to at the EIB, is that we as a corporate actually do have, of course, diversity and inclusion criteria, policies across our whole HR spectrum across Philips. We do take this criteria very much into account. And therefore, it would be a logical extension as a CVC to take similar criteria in our investment decisions. And so far, we have not been doing that. So it would be interesting also for this audience today, which is also largely corporate venture capital. It would be interesting to find out if those corporate gender diversity criteria are translated into a venture capital strategy, essentially. Because I believe that's part of what would need to happen and part of what we are now making more explicit at Philips to make that translation and help on that supply side to drive also our fund-of-fund, our venture capital partners and say, listen, we'd like to see that reflected in your teams. Because apparently through your research, it would show that by extension, we then get a more diverse lens on the investments of those funds as well, hopefully.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and I think a lot of it is indeed about just sort of awareness and then finding ways to actually, put this into action.
Yeah.
What we have heard from some of the, I mean, it's interesting. We hear similar things, whether it's the women entrepreneurs or even the investment teams that are looking for LP investors. Somehow we hear similar potential biases that may crop up in the questions that they get. And our study also refers to this. There was this Diana project, I think. A lot of it about women tend to get asked about their track record, about prevention of risk, how are they managing the risk, and
much more backward looking.
Yeah, and the men may get more questions towards the potential and the upside potential and all of the few, so there is that perception now. It's hard to generalize, but some of it is, I think, as you say, like Philips and many of the large corporations have actually experienced that at the performance reviews of staff, and they have brought in gender sensitivity training and so on. And is there a way to bring that in at the level of these of investment of those who are actually making the investment decisions, so that they catch themselves when they see that they may actually fall also into that trap to avoid it?
And it's actually no surprise that I'm the one currently driving this, being the only female person on this team. It wasn't, and everybody's very open to it, and actually says it's a belated effort. And actually, partly we're a little bit hopeful that some of the more growing prevalence of using impact criteria as part of your investment assessments, beyond a purely financial lens, may help in supporting that a little bit, as we've seen, and recent Dutch research in the Dutch market has also shown that in the kind of social and impact type venture landscape, the prevalence of female founders is even bigger, and they can sometimes have a better ability to talk about kind of their intrinsic motivation and the grit of driving a certain impact in the ecosystem. And we see that in healthcare, of course, which is where my experience sits.
Yeah, I think I'm getting a warning that we have 1 minute left, so it's clear that there is an issue on the supply side. So just a closing, let us know, given that we have an audience of corporate venturers and they can indeed do something. Just one thing, a call to action for corporates and for the public sector that we can do from tomorrow, and it will improve diversity in both sides, or in supply, as you prefer. So use your half a minute each to complete the questions.
Yeah, so I'll take my 20 seconds. So one element that we are now suggesting, aligned with an initiative in the Dutch market called Fundright, is actually adding a inclusion clause into shareholder documentation, which of course is more of a commitment to, for instance, on executive level positions, interview at least one female. So those types of, which is an HR policy we have at Philips in our HR executive level hires. So that needs to be the same, and there it's 50-50. So let's start with at least one, but that's an example of how you could actually make it explicit.
Great, thank you, Siva. Thank you, Laura. Siva, please, one recommendation.
Yes, indeed. I think it would be about this whole creating a bit of an awareness of the potential unconscious biases and making them more conscious. Yeah, so that in the next round of due diligence, you make sure that regardless of who is in front of you, you ask the same questions, and also put the public sector a bit on its, make them responsible to also drive this, and be an example.
So thank you. Just before we get kicked out, I think that for the corporates that are listening, please be aware and pay attention of the funds where you invest, that they have LPs and they have an investment claim that is positive for gender, and also be aware of unconscious bias when you choose where you invest. So thank you, Shiva, and thank you, Laura. It was a pleasure to share with you, and I think that the audience will very much enjoy from your experience. Thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Amparo.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Shiva. Bye-bye.